This is video number 4 of 15, where I'm speaking about the different shifts I see taking place in church and in mindsets. Just outside of our city, there's an area called Burton-on-Trent, and there's loads of water in that area. There's lakes and ponds all over the place. And sometimes at certain times of the year, what ends up happening is you end up with this really, really thick fog that comes. Because of the water on the ground, the fog's just attracted there, and it can be so thick that literally you can't see the front bonnet of your car. So this speaks to something that I believe is taking place in the church right now. If you read through the Old Testament, what you discover when you look at the presence of God, you discover that there was in the Old Testament a visitational paradigm, that there would be these moments where the presence of God would come upon people. So you think about Samson, you think about Gideon, you think about Saul. There's these accounts that speak about the presence of God coming upon them and them being empowered, but the presence of God didn't remain. This was the dynamic of the Old Testament, that the presence of God would come and visit, but the presence of God didn't abide. We then move into the New Testament, and of course we know from the book of Hebrews that we have a new covenant that's founded upon better promises. And there's been a period of time where there's been a real push for a move of God, and rightly so, because that's exactly what we want. And then there was a secondary push where it's actually we're not looking for visitation, we're looking for habitation. Now, both of these things are true, and I believe that the imagery that's shown in that picture of the cloud, of the fog and the lake reflects something that I would just want to poke at a little bit. John the Baptist said this: "I wouldn't have known who the Son of God was unless the Father pointed him out to me and said to me, 'The one on whom you see the presence of God descend and remain, this is the Son of God.'" So the definition then of a son, the definition of the Son, who is the prototype, and then for all others who come after him, is not that the presence of God visits, but the presence of God abides. So Jesus lived in that place of abiding presence. The scriptures, I believe, reveal three aspects or three dynamics of presence at least. There is the visitational presence of God, which you see a lot through the Old Testament. Then there is the omnipresence of God, where God is everywhere. You see that reflected in the way that David prays in the psalm where he says, "Where can I go from your presence, Lord? If I go to the depths of the ocean, you're there. If I go to the highest mountain, you're there." It speaks about the presentness of God, if I can use that word. But then you have a third manifestation of God's presence. So you have abiding presence, then you have God's omnipresence, and then you have God's visitational presence. Now, there's been a push, and rightly so, and the focus towards, we don't want a visitation, we want a habitation. But I want to suggest this to you, that if we have a covenant that's founded upon better promises, it's not that we want a habitational presence. Actually, what we should be releasing our faith for is a habitational presence that attracts visitational presence. So anybody who does any form of ministry will be able to testify that there are moments where God does exceptional things, where there are visitations of God's presence. So I believe we need to actually begin to develop a mindset where we're saying we are going to work very hard to develop a lifestyle and a culture within our own personal walk with the Lord, and within the ministries that we lead, the churches that we lead, even the communities in which we live. We're going to work towards that place, that we are creating a place where God inhabits, a habitational culture where the expectation is this is where God is. And when I use that term, I don't mean a habitational culture when we're in a meeting. I mean habitational culture wherever we are. So we have God with us all the time. After all, it's Emmanuel, God with us. But then with that mindset, we want to create an environment where it becomes a magnet for God's visitational presence. We need a move of God urgently in our nation. And we need to move to the place where we, as God's habitation, become places of visitation. And I want to encourage you not to take one or take the other, but recognize that we actually want both. We want habitation and visitation. We want to actually be those who are catalysts for visitations with God. That even in your day-to-day walk, and even in your workplace, even in our services, we're in the place that we're looking for that dynamic where there is an ongoing habitation of God's presence, but then moments of God's visitational presence as well. And of course, ideally we want those moments to be very long. We want them to be prolonged moments. We want them to become a move. And I believe that move of visitation begins with the revelation that we're first the habitation. So let's not have one or the other, but let's release our faith for both. God bless and bye.